Hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to see how we can use arrays inside functions. Okay. So in the last two videos, we have seen that how the one-dimensional and two-dimensional arrays are used in C programming language, right? In today's video, we're going to see arrays when how it can be used in functions. Okay. So let us begin. So before we start, we will quickly revise what are functions and how functions help us modify the or better write the code and help in reusing the code, right? Functions are a block of code which can be called many times without using unnecessary space in storing the program in the memory. Okay, like for example, if let's say we want to add two numbers, right? Now if it's only about adding two numbers, then we need not create a function, right? But let's suppose we want to add different sets of numbers. Okay, let's suppose we want to add 2 and 3, and after that we want to add 3 and 4, and after that we want to add 5 and 6, right? So you can see the logic of addition being used multiple times, right? Now since this logic of addition is being used multiple times, we will still have to write the code multiple times, right? So to avoid that, what we can do is we can write the logic once and reuse it with the help of functions. Okay, so let us see how that can be done. Okay, let's suppose I have let's define a function called add. Okay, now to define a function, there are two ways to define a function. Okay, one way is before the main, right? So before the main we can define the function. So the main itself is a function, right? So before that we can define a function, or we can define it after the main, right? Now if you declare it before the main function, uh, then the entire declaration and the definition can be at that particular place, right? But if you are trying to define the main function after main, then the problem is that the main function will not find your the declaration, right? Because it is coming after your main function. So that's why it is necessary to declare the function before, right? So it is the same way in which we declare the variable first before using the variable. The same way we have to declare the function first before we declare the before we use the function. Okay, so let's suppose we want to print a hello world with the help of functions, right? So the first thing that I do is the declaration is something like this. The first step is the type of return data, right? So what the function is going to return, so that will be the first statement. Then the name of the function. Okay, so let's say hello is the name of the function, then brackets, round brackets, and inside that you can have arguments, right? So if you want, you can have any arguments, or you can just leave it blank, and then this is the body of the code. Okay, so in the definition, this is how you define the function. Okay, so in this you will simply do a printf. Okay, and let's say I will tell hello. Okay, so now our function is defined. Now to call that function, we have to do we just have to mention the name of the function. Okay, so it is hello and round brackets. Okay, so as soon as I do this, that function will be called. Okay, and I forgot to add return 0, right? Okay, so now if I run this, it works and it prints hello. Okay, so now here is the advantage of using a function. I can call this multiple times and this function will be called multiple times. Okay, so that is the use of the function. Okay, so now the same thing I can do it. Let's say I do it after the main. Okay, so I remove that and I paste it over here. Okay, and now if I try to run it, see what happens. Okay, so it says basically you have not declared the variable, right? So the main reason why this is not working is the main function doesn't know what the hello function is, right? So it is always required that you declare all the variables. Okay, so either you should declare it here or define it before main. Okay, so let's say I define it over here. It is void hello and that's it. Okay, so I'm just going to write this much. I will not put the block. That is the only difference between declaration and definition. Okay, so now if I run it, it will run. Okay, so these are the two methods of how you define a function. Right now, to pass a parameter, right, let's suppose I want to pass a parameter. Let's say I have an int a equal to 5, right? So if I have this parameter, then to pass this parameter I have to send this to the function. Right now, when I send this to a function, it should be able to accept it. Right now, if you want to accept any parameters inside this brackets, inside the definition, you should define what type of variable that you want to accept. Okay, so let's suppose you want to accept a value a, right? So you have defined what is the value of a, what is the type of value that you're going to accept. So it is going to be integer, right? So now inside this function, that a value is variable a is available. Okay, now very important thing to remember, this a and this a are different. Okay, so even though the names are same, they both will be stored at a different location, right? So here I could use some other name also, let's say int r. Okay, so that is also possible. Still they both will be different, right? So let's take a variable a and I want to print that value over here. Okay, so whatever value I give, it will be printed over here, right? So that is the definition of the function. The same thing has to be shown over here. What is the type of the function, right? So I'm saying the declaration will say what type, the name and the type it is going to accept. Right now, if you want, you can also add the variable name, but that is not mandatory. You can skip that. Okay, and once that is done, you only thing you have to do is you have to just pass the name of the variable. Okay, so in this case, if I pass a, so this a will be sent to this function. So this a will be copied into this a, right? So these both a now become equal. Okay, so let's say we pass, instead of a, we pass 5 over here and 8 over here and 12 over here, right? So in all these three, the values are different, right? Let's make this 15 so that the value is different, right? So in the first case, a, that is value of 5. Okay, so that value is sent to hello, and that a equal to 5 will be stored inside this a, right? So now here the a value will be 5. In the next case, 15 will be stored in a, then 8 will be stored in a, and 12. Okay, so let's run this and you can see hello 5, hello 15, hello 8, hello 12. Okay, so this is how you pass the parameters. Okay, let's suppose you want to pass multiple parameters. Okay, let's say you want to pass two parameters, so you just have to add a comma and the type of the variable and another variable name. Okay, so b, right? So that simply means that you also have to pass that variable over here, right? So let's say comma 5, so a comma 5 comma 6 comma 7. Okay, okay. I have finished with the definition, I have finished with the calling of the function, but I have not yet declared it, right? So the declaration also I have to mention int, right? And I may have given a new variable, but I have not used it, so let's also use it. So another %d, and let us just print the values. Okay, if I run this, you can see I get the values. Okay, so first one is 5 5, second one is 15 6, right? 8 7, like that. Okay, okay. So this is how we handle data when it is accepting values like integer or float or something else. Okay, the same thing is true for float also. You can just replace this by float. Okay, but in our case we are going to deal with arrays, right? Arrays and strings. Okay, so we are going to see arrays and strings both over here, right? So in case of that, instead of passing a single variable, we are going to pass an array, right? So whenever you are going to pass an array, so let me just clear out the other variable. Okay, so I will just clear out this. Okay, so this was the previous program, right? So we sent a value of a. Now this time, instead of a, now this time I'm going to pass a different variable, right? Here the variable size is going to be, let's say, a size of 10, right? And instead of a variable, I'm going to initialize an array, right? So for the array, I am just going to take some values. Okay, so these are some of the values, and I'm going to pass that value to the array. Okay, so I'm passing that array to the function. Okay, so that will come over here, but here it's an integer, but it's not an array. So here at the definition also it has to be an array. Okay, and the size need not be specified, because the size will be computed based on the value that you assign to it, right? So if this is assigned, then that depending on this a, so it is a size of 5, right? So because sorry, a size of 10 will be used to assign to create this particular a, right? And then after that, if I run this right now, it will give you an error because your declaration is not complete. Okay, so in the declaration it still thinks that it is accepting an integer, but here you are accepting actually an integer array, right? To define that array, you can simply add a brackets, and this will tell the compiler that it is going to accept an array. Okay, so let's just print this. Okay, so if I just print, let's say, a of 0, okay, the first element, that is 1, that is 1 we are going to print, right? So if I run this, I get hello 1. Okay, so if I extract the third element, I will get 0 1 2 3, that is 4. I should get 4, hello 4, right? Okay, perfect. So now you have understood how we can pass arrays to the functions, right? Now similarly we can handle strings also, right? So if you are going to pass strings to the function, let's say I want to print some characters right after hello, right? So for that, first thing you should remember is this thing should be if it's a string, it has to be a character, right? And then you can define the character with the help of double quotes. Let's say I just write my name Shibu, okay, and then I give this to the function. Okay, so when I give this to the function, it comes over here and gets stored inside this a. Okay, again I'm repeating, this a that is defined in the main function and the a that is defined in the hello function is different. Okay, so basically this is called the scope of the variable. Okay, so every function scope of the variable is always inside the function in which it is declared, right? So here this character a is declared inside the main function, so it can be accessed inside main function only. Similarly, this int a is this particular variable is declared inside hello, so it can be accessed inside hello only, right? So once we have understood that, then this character array is being sent to hello and it has to be accepted here, but here it is int, right? So I have to just change it to character. So once I change it to character, now it is able to accept, right? And here in the definition also I should make it character, right? So once these two things are done, then I have this character with the name Shibu, right? So it is getting saved. But now how to display? Now to display this particular statement, what I have to do is I just have to use the format specifier %s and the name of the variable, name of the variable is a, right? So once I do this, I will get my result. Let's try to run this. You can see I get hello Shibu, right? So this is how you pass arrays and strings to a function. Okay, so now this is this what we have done right now is we have seen function without return type and without arguments. We have also seen function in which we have no return type and we have sent some arguments, right? Now we will see a function in which we have a return type. Okay, so we have always seen this statement return 0. Okay, so now today we will understand what is this return 0. Okay, so you must have already seen this in the chapter functions, but I will just quickly revise what this return does. Okay, so now what happens? Let's suppose let me just clear out everything. Okay, so all the definitions. So let's suppose I want to add two numbers, right? So I have int a equal to 4 and b equal to 5. Okay, so I have two numbers. I want to add this numbers. Okay, so basically if I want to add this numbers and store it in, let's say I take another variable, let's call it sum, right? So sum we can simply do sum by a plus b. Okay, right? So a plus b, but the problem here is for every time the value of a and b changes, I have to recompute this, right? So let's say after this the a value changes, a equal to 3 and a equal to b equal to 4, right? So in that case I have to again compute sum, right? So as the number of times this changes, that many times I have to find the sum, right? So if you see I am not reusing the code, I am writing the code again and again, right? So this is not a good practice. So whenever such thing happens, you should understand that it's a place where we should write a function. Okay, so let's create a function for this. Okay, so before writing the function we will declare the function, right? So let's begin by let's start with a void. Okay, inside void what we will do is we will make a function called add, and it is going to take two variables, int a, Okay, so in the definition you need not specify the variables, you just list the number of variables you're going to have. So I have two variables, add int and int. Then over here you can just type void add, and inside this I will, let's say int, this time let just to make it a little bit clearer, I will just change the names of the variables. Okay, it doesn't matter what type of what is the name of the variables over here. Okay, even if you keep a and b, it doesn't matter because those variables will be visible only over here. Okay, so once that is done, I can simply find out, we can initialize another variable, let's say int sum. Okay, and now again this sum is defined or declared inside the main function, so that is not visible in the add function, so I can declare it again. Okay, so once that is done, I can just find out the value of sum, and I can write sum is equal to x plus y. Okay, and once I get that, I can simply printf sum is, let's say percentage d and sum, right? So this runs the this creates the program, this the basically the logic to do addition, right? So now when it comes over here, if I want to use that logic over here, so all I have to do is I have to just replace this line and just say that add a comma b. Okay, so when I do that, these values of a and b will be given to this function, this particular three statements will be executed, and then it will come out. Okay, then these two variables new values will be taken, and the same command I can use to do the addition on these two numbers, right? And when you see, you will get the answer for both the questions, right? So 4 plus 5 is 9 and 3 plus 4 is 7. Okay, so with the same logic I have got the answer to both the problems. Okay, so that is how you reuse the functions. Okay, so you are writing the function once and reusing it again and again, right? Now is the third part. Okay, so now the problem is this function is doing a lot of things. First of all, it is getting the input, then sorry, not the input, it is declaring the value and then adding it and then also printing it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is the printing task can be done by the main function. Okay, so the addition, the name of the function is addition, so why it is doing printing work, right? So since the function is meant to do addition, we will do addition and let the printing be done by the main function, right? So let us remove this line from here and do it over here, right? And another time. Okay, so basically this function only does one thing, it does the addition, right? And gives back the result. Okay, so now at this point if I run this, okay, so what happens is it comes over here, gets the values 4 and 5, it does the addition, right? It comes over here, does the addition, and it comes back, but this sum value, some variable is defined inside add. How will I get that value over here, right? So this sum value will not be updated if this sum is updated, right? Because these both sums are different, right? They are in different functions. Now to have this also updated, there are multiple ways of doing that. Okay, first thing is you can pass this as a reference, right? But that is a different topic, right? So we will in the second case, what we are going to do is we are going to use a return tag. Okay, so now now we are going to decide which type of return type this function is going to take. Okay, so basically return type is nothing but it is one value which will be returned returned by the function, okay, it has to be of either integer, float, double or character. Okay, so the primitive types, so these, it should be one of them, right? So if it's one of them, then it can be returned, right? So let us see which values I can return. Okay, so in this, what answer we want is, we want the sum to be returned, right? Because x and y is coming from the main program only, right? But the value that is calculated is sum, so we want this sum to be returned back to the main function, right? So main is calling add, and it should get return, in return, sum. Okay, so to do that, we can simply do return and sum. Okay, but before I do this, okay, right now I cannot use the return, because the return type mentioned here is void. Okay, void means there is no return type. Okay, so since there is no return type, I cannot use this return statement, right? So to return something, you will have to change this void to the type of data you want to return. Okay, so since I want to return int, this should become int. Okay, so it should change here, at the same time here also. Okay, so always remember, the definition and declaration should always be the same. Okay, so once that is done, now this will work. Okay, so now when I call the add function, it is going to return the value of sum. Okay, but then when it is returning something and you're not saving it somewhere, okay, so you, to save it, you have to use the assignment operator, right, and save it to something. So that we are going to save it in sum. Okay, so we have saved it in sum, and now it now we can do the addition. It is saved in sum, and we are just printing it out, right? Similarly, we will do this over here, and again we are printing the sum. Okay, so let's try to run this, and you can see we get the same result, right? But this time the add function is doing only one thing, that is addition. Okay, so that is how you can use return type. Okay, so once you have understood all these things, now we can go to the problem program, that is to get, let's clear out everything. Okay, and let's do a return 0 over here. Okay, so now we have to write a program to find the sum and average of an array, but with the help of functions, right? So what we have to do is, we have to find the sum and we have to find the average. Okay, so always remember, whenever you create functions, the functions should be made in such a way that it is handling one task at a time, right? So it is preferable that your function handles one task at a time, right? So first of all, the point to remember is, it's an array, right? So let's first declare an array. Let's say int a, and it's a type, let's say 30 elements, right? And it is currently empty, right? Then we will ask the user to enter the number of elements, right? So for that we need a variable, let's say n, which is the number of elements, right? So let's ask the user for n. Okay, %d ampersand n, right? So once this is done, now we can just tell the user what is this enter number of elements, right? So once that is done, so the user entered, let's say 5 elements that he wants to add, right? So I have to use a for loop over here. Okay, so I'm going to use a for loop, and the value, so for that I need a variable, let's say I, that is the counter variable, right? So that I will start from sorry, 0, because it's an array. We always start array counter with 0. Okay, so 0 to I less than n. Okay, and I do I plus plus. Okay, and then here I will first do printf, and I will say enter percentage %d. Okay, and I will write, let's say I. Okay, so enter first number. Okay, I will write it something like this, and then I will do scanf percentage %d, sorry, percentage %d, and the variable is a, right? So a of I. So in the first iteration, the first index a of 0 will be scanned. In the second iteration, the second index will be scanned, like that. Okay, so once this statement is done, now my input is ready. Right now my task is, now my job will be to find the sum of all these elements. Right now, to find the sum of all these elements, what I will do is I will create a function which will give me the sum. Okay, so for that, let's declare a function. Now the value that is returned by the sum will be a type int, right? So that is the int. Then I will give the name of the function as add, let's say add array. Right, you can name it anything that you want. Okay, and inside that I have just one parameter, that is an integer array. Right, so integer array, so that's why I have I have written this, right, square brackets. Right, then at the end, now I will define this function. Right, I will just copy the declaration and come over here and then just define it. Okay, now here I will have to specify the name of the variable, let's say int a. Right, and here I'm going to now here I want to iterate over all the elements. Right, now here I do not know the size of the array, right, because the user may enter any size. So it will be a good practice to also send the size of the array. Right, so I will have another parameter, that is integer, which is actually basically sending the n to the function. Right, so I will just pass the n over here. Right, so basically this is the array and this is the size of the array. Right, okay, so now here I am going to do a for loop again. Right, so the for loop will be the same for loop. Right, so I will just remove these lines. The for loop will be the same, but I don't have I. Right, because I is defined inside this function, main function, so I have to define I over here also. Right, so let's define I. Second, so I have a, I have n, I have I. So this loop will run those many times and I just have to find the sum. So let us declare sum also inside this function. Okay, because the sum, there is no variable to store the sum right now in main. Okay, so we will have to create that also over here, but for the time being we are dealing with add array function, so there also we need a variable to store the sum. Right, so I will create the variable and initialize whenever it's sum, you're going to progressively add, so you initialize it with 0, and here the formula will be sum is equal to sum plus the index of whatever is the value inside a of I. Okay, so in the first iteration this will be sum, that is 0 plus a of 0. So a of 0 will be whatever the user has entered the first element. Okay, so after this loop completes you will get the value as sum. Okay, so that is the value that I have to return to the user. Okay, so I will just return sum to the main function, right? So now this function comes back over here, right? So whenever we call it, this is the value, that sum is the value that is going to be returned. Okay, so let's call it over here. So let's call the function add array, and here I have to give two parameters. The first one is the array which has the values, that is over here a, right? So a comma, then the second is the number of elements, which is nothing but n. Okay, so I'm going to give these two variables a and n, and this is going to come over here, do the calculations and give me in return sum. Okay, so that sum, when it is returned, I have to store it somewhere. Okay, so for that I need a variable, right? So let's call it as sum. Okay, and here we are not doing progressive calculation, so you need not initialize it to anything, right? So here you can simply say sum is equal to add array. Okay, so whatever this add array is going to return, that is this sum, okay, that will be stored into this sum. Okay, so again I'm repeating these same things again. So this sum that is defined over here is different from the sum that is defined in this function. Okay, so always all the definitions, all the declarations that are done inside a function resides in that function only. Okay, so this sum will not be accessible from here. Okay, so once we have this, the next step is just to print it, right? So let's print the result, printf, and we will just write sum is percentage d and sum. Okay, so let's try this program out. Let's enter three elements. Enter element number 0 is 2, and you can see what has happened. This error simply means I have forgotten to add ampersand sign during my scanf. Yes. Okay, so I will just add the ampersand sign and run it again. Let's add three elements, 2, 3 and 4. When I add these numbers, what I get is 9 sum. Okay, perfect. Okay, now just to change this, I just found out one little problem. You can see it is starting, it is saying enter 0 number, right? Okay, so I will just change it little bit, which looks better to me. Okay, so this time it will say enter number 1. Okay, like that, right? But still the index is starting from 0, right? So I will just add 1 to everything, right? So now what happens is, now it will say enter number 1, number 2, number 3 and number 4, and enter, you will get the sum. Perfect. Okay, so we have got this. The next step will be to simply use this to find the average. Okay, obviously you could simply do and do an average over here. Okay, you can write average, right? You can find the average, and since it's average, I would prefer it to be as a float. Okay, and I can simply calculate average is equal to sum divided by n. That's it, and I can just print out these values over here. Okay, so average, right? And just so that the sum average is printed on a new line, I will just add \n. Okay, so now let's run this again. You can see we got okay, so I forgot to add percentage f, that's why that gave me an error. Okay, so let's try it once more, and you can see we get the result perfectly. Okay, so now this was the way of doing it, right? So the same thing I could have done with the help of functions also. So I could make another function for average, right? So let's do that. okay, since we are doing functions. So we will have another function to find average, right? So now average is going to be a float value, right? So the return type of the function will be float, right? And let's call it find average, right? And the input will be sum, right? That is an integer, and the number of elements, that is also an integer, right? So this is the definition for my function. I will come at the end, paste it, and so that was a declaration. Now I will define my function. Okay, so let's call it as sum and this as n. Okay, so here the only thing I have to do is I can simply do return. Okay, I will just find out the value of, we will declare a float, we'll declare a float called avg, right? And we will find out the value of avg with the help of sum divide by n. Okay, now one thing to remember, sum is integer, n is integer, so the division will also going to be integer. So I will just cast one of them as float so that I get appropriate answer, right? And after that I will just return the average value, right? So this is the value that is going to be returned. So now this function will return an average. Let's come over here. So instead of doing this formula over here, I will just do an average, and I will just give sum comma n to this, and it will get the average for me, right? So let's try this out. 4 elements, first element, so we get the result, right? Perfect. So I hope you have understood how we have used arrays inside functions, right? So passing arrays is very simple. Only you have to remember is you have to have you have to define the array. You have to declare in the definition itself, you have to mention the parameters as arrays. Okay, and you need not define the size of it. The size will be automatically taken from the whenever it is called, right? Okay, so once we have done with this, now we can also take an example where strings are involved, so that we can also deal with strings. Okay, so let's take another example. In that we will see how to use strings in functions. Okay, so let's take a program where the user is going to enter a string, and what we have to do is we just have to split the string into words. Okay, so that is what the function that we are going to prepare, right? So let's just define, let's first clear out everything and start a new program, right? Okay, so let's start a new program, write a program. Okay, so in this program what we are going to do is we are going to take an input from the user, a string input from the user, and we are going to split it into words. Okay, so to do that, let's first define a string. So character, let's say we call it x. Okay, character x of size, let's say 50. Okay, then I'm going to I'm going to ask the user for input, right? So let's just tell the user enter a sentence, right? And after that I'm going to do scanf. Okay, scanf. And here, very important, I could use percentage s, but then it cannot read a sentence, right? Because scanf cannot percentage s cannot read after space, right? So I could use percentage this. Okay, and I can give the name of the variable. Okay, this is one way of doing it. Or you can simply do get s. This is always easier, right? So I can do get s and get the string. Okay, so once we get the string, now we have to send the string to the function to calculate or basically to split the strings into words. Okay, so it is basically going to separate out the words and print it out to you, right? So let's find out what will be the definition. Okay, so first let us write the definition. So let's say it is not going to return anything, right? So it is going to just print the words, right, one by one. So no return type. Then let's call it as split word, split, let's call it split. Okay, and here I'm going to send a character array as the parameter, right? So that is my declaration. And here I'm going to now define the function, right? Now in this function I have to give a name to the variable, right? Let's call it as a, right? It doesn't matter what you call this variable. Okay, so once we have that, we know how do we know the character that particular string has ended. The string ends when it reaches the null character, right? And the null character is given by \0, right? So we are going to just run a while loop, okay, till the character a of I. Okay, so that there has to be I over here, right? So let's declare a variable called I, int I equal to 0. Let's start it with I equal to 0. So if that character at a of I, if it is not equal to null, okay, so I am going to run till not equal to null. As soon as it reaches null, it will stop, right? So once that is there, I just have to I will simply print all the characters, and if there is a space, then I will simply print a new line. Okay, so let's just write that code. So if a of I is equal to inside single quotes, if it's a space, right? If it's a space, then I will simply just print a new line. Else I will print the character. Okay, printf %c and the character a of I, right? So basically whenever there is a space, a new line will be created. Okay, so let's try this out. Now before trying this out, we have to call this function, right? Now to call this, we will have come over here and just call it split and give the variable x, because x is the variable which is storing the sentence, right? So once I do this, it should give me my result, right? So if I run this, let's say hello world, hi Shibu. Okay, so I have added 4 words. If I enter, you can see what has happened. It is continuously printing the same string again and again. That is because I have forgotten to do increment of this I, right? That means after this particular iteration is over, I have to increment the value of I so that the next character is checked, right? So what was happening was I was checking the same first character only, right? I of 0, right? I'm not incrementing it. So let's run it again. This time now when I run it, you can see I get hello world, hi Shibu, all the words separated into different functions. Okay, so I hope you have understood how we have done this, and this is how we handle functions, sorry, strings and arrays inside functions. Okay, I hope you have understood. We will see you in the next